there's a problem. The problem is people begin to realize in the late 19th century that pollution is a concern, but they're not really exactly, they don't have any sort of ability to deal with it, right? As you might imagine, guys in the back and the giant money bag people, they would be the ones that you would be making pay for the pollution, right? You would be essentially like assessing them fees or making them clean up the pollution that their industry generated. They don't pay for that. And as you might imagine, anti-pollution regulations would be the number one thing that those guys don't want, right? And so there's this idea, like Lowell, Massachusetts is a great example. Lowell in Massachusetts, western part of the state, was big textile mills, big textile town. If you go to Lowell, they run these textile mills 24/7. The workforce is predominantly young girls. The mills run all the time, and there's this black cloud of smoke that hangs over the town. There's like no vegetation, everyone's got respiratory problems. So everyone agrees, okay, pollution's bad, but on the other hand, like, what are you gonna do? The mill owners aren't gonna pay for it, right? And so that's that, right? And so pollution is one of those problems where it's identified as an issue that industrialization causes, but it would require the government essentially being willing to overrule these guys and make them pay. And it turns out not really until the 20th century will there be any kind of organized movement, what we might call a conservation movement, and that's mostly about preserving parts of nature. So like, let's cut down the forest for like lumber and stuff, but not all of it, right? Like maybe we'll leave the pretty part, right? So that people can go to the national park, right? And then on top of that, there's the idea in the 20th century, it's really the 60s, when you get the environmentalist movement, which says like, maybe let's just not pollute the environment because we don't get two of those, right? And so this is a big issue because, for example, today, when we go to talk to other countries about their industrialization, like China and India, and we say, hey, you know, you're pumping a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, you're dumping a lot of toxic waste into the ocean, this is really bad, it has huge consequences, you know, climate change, ocean acidification, this affects all of us. What do they say? They say, well, wait a minute, in the 19th century, you Americans industrialized your economy and you didn't care about pollution at all. Why should we care about it now, right? And if you're the premier of China, if you're the dictator for life of China, Xi Jinping, you say, memorably back during the Bush administration, Bush talked to the premier of China, his name was Wen Jiabao, and he said to Wen Jiabao, what do you worry about at night? Because I worry about like Osama bin Laden getting a nuclear bomb onto a ship and sailing into New York Harbor and killing like 30 million people. And Wen Jiabao said, I worry about creating 750,000 new jobs a year for Chinese people. And so if you're Wen Jiabao, any attempt to curb pollution in China would mean slowing economic growth, closing power plants, shuttering factories, insisting on anti-pollution technology measures. And if that's the case, it's going to cost money and slow down economic growth. So you're basically having to tell Chinese people, your life isn't going to be as good as it could be because like some Americans care about the environment. And so that's a serious problem because it turns out pollution that we put in the atmosphere, the Chinese put in the atmosphere, affects all of us eventually. And yet in the 19th century, there was basically not a peep about that. And so that'll be a thing that if you were taking an environmental history class, you would talk about this, and you wouldn't really see an environmental movement dedicated to sort of doing something about it really until the 20th century. Right? It's not really until the publication, for example, of Rachel Carson's book, The Silent Spring, and a bunch of controversies about pesticides, DDT, and other things that really make people realize that like you put stuff in the environment and like maybe it just stays forever, right? If you pump DDT into the aquifer, we're all drinking it for like 30 years. Right? And so again, this is an example of the fact that there are these issues that industrialization causes that weren't really sort of, you know, this wasn't like an organized thing where we thought about it, right? Nobody sat down and said, okay, let's build a bunch of factories and put a bunch of workers in the factories and make a bunch of money, and like also what would be the problems, what would be the consequences? Instead, that it just sort of happened, and these things just kind of occurred, right? And so the next thing we can mention too, it's worth talking about the railroad for a minute. Railroads, some people are fascinated by them, other people find them uniquely boring. In America, we mostly consign railroads to freight hauling, and passenger railroads, if you're not in the Northeast, no one rides them anyway. Which is, if you go to Europe, it's weird because everybody rides railroads in Europe, and they're cheap, and they're safe, and they're fine, and they're great. Maybe one day Elon Musk will, when he's not launching cars into space and building robots, build us all super fast vacuum trains, which I guess we can ride into the future, which is like what he wants to do. And so it's like Elon Musk is like, maybe he's going to build all this cool shit, maybe he's actually the bad guy in a James Bond movie. Like, yeah, like, you know, like it's cool, like he seems great, but also like, then like he wants to build rockets and colonize Mars.
Can we build a sub to go save those kids in Thailand?
Yeah, he offered to, yeah. Did you see the one actually doing? Yeah, I mean, because well, I guess if you're Elon Musk, you have $250 billion. You know, why not go save? And also, it's free publicity because you give them all a flamethrower on the way out of the cave. And so yeah, I mean, so maybe he'll just build us all a robot car and also colonize colonize Mars. And it's like, 20 years ago, if you're like a private individual wants to colonize Mars, it'd be like, whatever, is this Blade Runner? But now it's like, okay, actually he is the guy that runs a robot company and also a rocket company and also like a, maybe he will, right? Like maybe there will be a colony run by him on Mars. It's just like cool, because like colonies on Mars are cool, but also it's like creepy. So, like I said, I can't figure out whether he's like good guy industrialist or like the villain of a Bond movie where eventually he's gonna like extort the UN for like $1 trillion, right? And so, having said that, railroads are a big deal though. We live in a world today that the railroads basically produced, and that is a world where transporting objects and people from place to place is totally inexpensive. A couple years ago, I decided that I needed a gadget for my computer. I went on Amazon, I paid $9. It was delivered to my house like less than a week later, and it came in a filthy Ziploc bag from Guangzhou, China. And it was a little weird because it was literally shipped to me in a stapled shut Ziploc bag, and the bag itself was filthy, and inside was like another bunch of plastic wrapping up my dongle, and it came from Guangzhou, China. It had a big shipping label on the side. It was a wireless adapter for my controller for my computer. And so this is a big deal because some guy in a factory made this in Guangzhou, China, and then when they heard some guy in America wanted one and it ordered on Amazon, he rolled it up, shoved it in a bag, printed out a shipping label, took my $10 and threw it in the mail. And a week later I got it. It sailed across the Pacific Ocean and then got on like a train or something from California and came to my door. And so the idea that you could send cheap electronics a long distance was a huge revolutionary idea. Throughout most of human history, if you were going to transport commodities over a long distance, they weren't valuable, they weren't worth it. Grain, rice, cloth, those things were they were so cheap that it was cheaper to just produce them locally than it is to ship them any distance, because it's monumentally expensive to move something like that. The only thing that would be worth doing that for is really valuable stuff. Slaves, gold, jewels, silk, spices, anything else just wouldn't be worth taking the distance. The cost of the thing is going to be, shipping it is going to be more than the cost of the thing. The railroad utterly changes that. And so to just give you a neat little example, if you write a story, and the story is about people going from Barcelona, Spain to Moscow, Russia, your story is set in 1100 AD, most of your story is going to be the thousands of mile trip overland or by sea from Barcelona to Moscow, ship voyage to Turkey or to Lithuania, and then like an enormous carriage ride or horse ride all the way to Moscow. On the other hand, today, if your story is about someone going from Barcelona to Moscow, the opening credits of the movie can just be them going to the airport, right? And they just put their bag in the conveyor belt, and they buy a ticket, and they get on a plane, they go to sleep, and they wake up and they're in Moscow, and the story can start, right? And so that's a huge change. It's completely inconsequential for someone to travel a long distance today. If you want to go to Hong Kong tomorrow, you just go to the airport, buy a ticket to Atlanta or New York, and you get the next flight to Hong Kong, and all you need is some cash. It happens all the time, planes go every day, right? And so today, transporting goods is so inexpensive, it basically doesn't have a cost. And about a decade ago, 2 decades ago, I wrote a book called The China Price. And he argued that if you produce an object in the world that could be produced more cheaply in China, then you're out of business. Because somebody's going to make the thing that you make in China, and when they make it, they're going to sell it for the thing it costs in China, which is way less than it costs you to make it, and the price of shipping the thing from China to your customers doesn't matter. And so your electronics that cost thousands of dollars to make, because you have to pay American workers, $12 an hour to make these things, they're going to pay somebody in China $2 an hour. They're going to save a ton of money on labor and factory costs, and then they're going to sell that product to your customers for a fraction of the price, because the shipping costs don't matter. And it turns out that guy's exactly right, only now it's Bangladesh. It's not China anymore. China doesn't like cheap labor. They want to do high-tech stuff. Now the labor's gone into places like Vietnam and Cambodia and Bangladesh. But the same story applies, right? The shipping costs just don't matter, right? The railroad is the beginning of this. This is the beginning of the story happening, right? And so the railroad sort of links together everything. And if you look at American progress that we put up back in, here she is leading the railroads and also the telegraph wires, which are the two sort of game-changing technologies of the 19th century. Instantaneous communication, relatively speaking, and at the same time also quick moving of freight back and forth, right? Lincoln's assassination is the first really kind of national event because it's the first thing that happened that everybody sort of knew about rapidly. Within like a day or two, everybody in the country knew that Lincoln had been assassinated because word goes out on the telegraph wires. And in the summer of 1863, when the Battle of Gettysburg and the Battle of Vicksburg happened, Lincoln learned about the Battle of Vicksburg, Mississippi ending before the Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania ending, because he got a telegraph about the Battle of Vicksburg ending on July 4th, 1863, and then later that afternoon, a guy rode a horse from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C. to tell him about the Battle of Gettysburg. He'd ridden all day. And so even though Gettysburg is a short drive by car from Washington, D.C., it took the guy 24 hours to ride a horse there. It took the telegraph like 10 minutes to go from Jackson, Mississippi to Washington, D.C. Right? And so those two things change everything, right? All of a sudden, businesses can export stuff all over the country, and it can be totally regular. If you want to go, if you have a slaughterhouse, you're the guy Borden, right? Charles Borden. You got money during the Civil War selling canned powdered milk to Union soldiers. That was how he made his money. After the war, he gets into cattle ranching, right? He doesn't ranch the cattle, he buys them from ranchers, right? What he does is he puts the cows on train cars, he ships them to Chicago, and he builds the world's biggest slaughterhouse. And then he takes the cows, runs them through the slaughterhouse, you kill them, skin them, cut up the meat, cut off all the other bits you're going to use, pack all the meat into tins, and tan all the leather into sort of cowhide for the chairs and jackets and stuff, and then you sell that stuff all over the country, right? And Borden, by the way, makes the meat, cow meat pays for the whole thing. It's the other things, the hose for glue and the leather that actually make him the profit. That's how his business works. You can't do that without trains, right? Without trains, you'd be having guys literally driving cattle from Texas to Chicago. And the cattle don't want to, you can't do it in the winter, it's freezing cold. Cows get thin when they exercise, like when they march all the way across the continent. You don't want that. You want them on the trains so they're not exercising, so they have more meat, so they're worth more and they're heavier and they get you more profit. And also, you can't, even with refrigerated railroad cars, you still need regular deliveries of meat, right? It turns out everyone in New York eats every 3 to 4 hours, right? Every breakfast, noon, and dinner. You need regular shipments of meat to be able to sell your customers food, or they're going to obviously not live. And so the trains make all of this totally predictable. You can go to the company and say, look, I'm Borden. I got 10,000 head of cattle coming in every week to my slaughterhouse. I've got 40,000 pounds of canned beef going out every day. What's going to cost me to ship that stuff to my suppliers in these 5 cities, right? They're going to tell you. They're going to say, oh, well, our freight would be this much. It would be this much per pound, and here's the train schedule, and this is when you can expect all this to happen. And it would be completely predictable and totally boring, which is what guys in business want, right? Completely predictable and totally boring means you can plan exactly what's going to happen, right? You can absolutely plan all of it. And so as a consequence, the railroad is huge. A good example of the railroad is that in and of itself it sort of doesn't do anything, but it enables every other business that you could mention. And so Sears and Roebuck's a great example. Sears and Roebuck are these two guys that run a store. And they run like an appliance store. And they discover that in any given retail day, in the morning all the way to close, there's a limit to how much crap you can sell because you have to interact with people. You're like, what would you like? You want a blender? Like, what color? Okay, and then like she pays and I give it to her. And that there's only so much time in the day to do that over and over again. And so they close the store and they start selling things in a catalog. And then you can automate the whole process. You get orders, the orders come in, you throw those things in a box, you ship them back. But that only works because the telegraph lets you send orders to the warehouse and the railroad lets you send packages back out, right? It's sort of like Amazon.com, which is a wonderful idea, and I literally would buy any object imaginable. I already have bought it on Amazon.com. Because it's so much easier to just do this and get like cat litter or staplers or like whatever. My wife hasn't discovered a thing other than like milk that you can't get on Amazon because we get packages all the time. She's like, I don't even know what that is, but it's probably a thing we need, so I ordered it. And on like books, every book you ever wanted, and it's a book you didn't know you wanted, and you're like, oh, I'll probably read this, okay. And so Amazon can't have an actual catalog or a store because there'd be no way to fit all those products in the store, right? You can't have 40,000 books, right? And so Amazon works because it's on the internet, and you can browse their literally infinite catalog with a search. Sears and Roebuck works because the telegraph allows them their business to exist. And so the Sears and Roebuck guys, they are smart. They make their catalog smaller and thinner than any other book people would normally have because they know that the Midwestern housewives, when they clean their house, you pick up all the books, you dust the table, and you put the books back with the smallest and thinnest book on top. And so it's always the Sears catalog. And so when you sit down, you look at the Sears catalog, and you're like, oh, I'll just browse this while my friend is getting coffee in the kitchen or whatever, right? And then you see a bunch of stuff you like, and you're like, I should go order this. right? The form in the back is a pre-printed, preset order form. That's a Western Union telegraph form. And so they designed it by going to the Western Union company saying, like, what do your telegraph forms look like? We'll put one in the back of the catalog. That way, when you cut the form out and fill it out, and you give it to the Western Union guy, like, he already knows how to, it's already designed so he can just put it in as a telegraph message automatically, right? And it works that way. And they